Thank you, Nick, and good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully, us coming up right after lunch, after you've had a really nice lunch and had a really nice conversation with the program directors, we're not going to put you to sleep. It's really hard when you're trying to pay attention and you have this food in your stomach trying to process at the same time. But we're going to just give you, as Nick said, some information about the standardized video interview, allay your fears a little bit, just kind of tell you how we're approaching this, and my colleague Rebecca Frazier will come up and also give you some information about how we're evaluating it and how we expect to move forward. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview and talk a little bit about the administration of it. Rebecca's going to talk about the evaluation and the preparation, and then pricing will be very quickly because there's no cost for applicants, and then we'll just open it up for questions. So let me just take you back a little bit. So many of you may be saying, why are we even doing this in the first place? The AAMC, where both Rebecca and I work, have been involved in an initiative for the past 3 years to optimize graduate medical education. So the AAMC has been doing a great deal of work in undergraduate medical education, but saw that there were some gaps based on talking to stakeholders that we felt that perhaps we could get involved with to improve it. And so when we think about the transition to residency, we think about the time period from entering medical school up through your first year of residency. And so in talking to various stakeholders, and looking at the literature, there were a number of gaps that kept resonating and kept coming up about what we could possibly do to improve the process. We were hearing from many of the medical school folks that they felt like the residency selection process was overtaking the 4th year, and that applicants were spending more time on the interview trail than in classes and preparing for graduation. We've heard from everyone, all stakeholders, medical schools, applicants, as well as program directors, that as the number of applicants are increasing and the number of applications are being submitted by applicants are increasing, programs are finding it very difficult to manage all of the information that they're receiving, and increasingly they're relying more heavily on the USMLE Step 1 scores than they would even like. Recognizing that that only provides a small piece of information about the applicant and what they bring to the table for residency. There's also been discussions about the lack of information about programs. Applicants tell us that they would love to apply to fewer programs, but there's not enough information out there about the programs to make decisions. And so without that information, they rely on submitting what I call the shotgun. They send a lot of applications out to a lot of programs, and then based on getting interviews, that helps them to kind of narrow their focus a little bit. And then there's the financial burden that both applicants who are applying to increasingly large numbers of applications and programs who are having to process these applications, have faculty conduct interviews, it's taking a financial toll on them as well. So the AAMC stepped in to see if there were certain things that we could do to alleviate some of the stress. And so we focused on the standardized video interview because we felt that it would help programs get better information about applicants. As Nick indicated, the board scores give you a lot of information about your medical knowledge, and there's other information that is provided by the medical schools about your professionalism and so forth, but sometimes it's difficult for programs to tease that information out in a way that makes it easy for them to compare apples to apples or applicants to applicants. So we believe that we could help by providing tools that would enable programs to have a tool that provided reliable and accurate information, something that was easy for them to understand, that was readily available, something that could help them compare across applicants, and could help them in the pre-interview screening. And that was very important to us because it facilitates holistic review. We wanted to give programs a tool that would help them to apply it against the largest part of their applicant pool, and not at the end where they've already made decisions about who they're inviting for an interview. That would, we hope, would help programs to have a more diverse applicant pool from which to choose, and to help them to identify applicants that would have a better fit to their programs. And we also felt that it would help applicants by providing an opportunity for them to provide information about their prior experiences that would be helpful to programs as they're making decisions about the non-academic competencies. So that was what gave birth to the standardized video interview. We've been working with a group of folks across emergency medicine for the past, we're going into our 3rd year. This is a list of the folks who are representative of emergency medicine on what we call the Emergency Medicine Standardized Video Interview Working Group. As you can see, it touches across EMRA and the RSA, so we have applicant representation, but we also have folks all across emergency medicine. So we're very thankful because they provide oversight to us as we continue to develop this tool, and they make sure that we are dotting our I's and crossing our T's so that we create the best tool possible. So what are the goals of the standardized video interview? As I stated earlier, it's designed to provide information to programs to help them make determinations about who they wish to invite for interview. It provides information about the non-academic. As Nick said, we're focusing on just 2 competencies, interpersonal and communication skills and professional behavior. It helps us to balance out the information that programs are receiving so they're not hopefully over-relying on the STEP scores. We recognize, it's just as important. They will continue to incorporate it in their decision-making, but it gives them other pieces of information that they can rely upon. So it makes the standardized video interview one of the many factors that they would consider as they're trying to make determinations about who to invite in for interviews. From a long-term perspective, should the SVI go forward, and we're not there yet, there's still a lot of information that we're collecting, but should it go forward, we think that one of the things that it will definitely do is reduce the staff time required to conduct holistic review. By giving them the actual score, it helps them to kind of focus their attention on those applicants who they feel are most closely aligned with what they're seeking in applicants. And it gives them back that time that they've been using, trying to pull that information out of individual pieces of applications, and the information is being all over the place. So as Nick indicated, the SVI, the format is that it's online, it's text-based, 6 questions, that's all it is, 6 questions, and a total of about 21 minutes to complete it. So it doesn't take a great deal of your time, but it has the potential of providing an incredible amount of information on which programs can make decisions. As Nick also indicated, the questions will come up, applicants will have 30 seconds to read it and start to formulate their response, and then they'll have up to 3 minutes to provide that response via audio-visual. The 2 measurements, or the 2 areas of focus, are the competencies of interpersonal and communication skills and professionalism. We've been working with program directors in emergency medicine and across other specialties. They helped us with selecting the questions that we include in the standardized video interview. They helped us to match them up or to track them to the ACGME competencies so that we're assured that we're measuring the competencies as they've been spec'd out for the individual specialties. They look at them also to see if there's any bias in the way that the questions are answered. If there's any bias that is recognized and that they make us aware of, we take those questions out of the pool and those questions aren't asked. As Nick also said, we use a behavioral anchored rubric to score the interviews, the interview responses. The scoring rubric, it's a 5-point scale. We work with program directors to help us understand what the minimum requirements for an applicant getting into residency, what the expectations are for a PGY1 applicant. And we use that as the basis of setting up anchors, and the program directors helped us to determine at each level, from level 1 all the way up to level 5, what kinds of behaviors would be appropriate for applicants at those various levels. So we're very confident in the information that has been provided to us by the program directors, and we've incorporated that in the scoring rubric. With regard to the raters, in emergency medicine, we've been using folks who have experience in human resources, expertise in recruitment and in interviewing to conduct the review and the evaluation and scoring of the responses. It's a diverse pool of folks that we've hired to do this work, but we provide them with extensive training, about 12 hours, where we talk to them about what the expectations are for a PGY1 resident, what is the field of emergency medicine, and what are the folks who are going into that specialty expected to do. We also train them on unconscious bias, recognizing that all of us have some biases. It's just part of the human condition. But understanding what our personal biases are and being able to prevent those biases from overtaking how they rate the responses that they're evaluating is critically important to the AAMC to ensure fairness of all applicants who are participating in the SVI. So they have training on unconscious bias. We also have a process that we go over with them about how to rate the interviews, and we focus on content. We recognize that there's more that goes into an interview than just the content, but for the folks who are evaluating and scoring your interviews, that is the primary focus, is that they're listening to what you're saying and they're making an assessment of what you're saying using the rubric that has been established. And so all of that information has been developed based on training that we received and our trainers on information we've gotten from program directors, and that's incorporated in this entire process. So these folks are getting about 20 hours of training, first with the 12 hours where we're just training them on how to conduct this, and then there's another 8 hours where they're practicing before they even see any of your responses, your interview responses. They're going through practicing, getting feedback from the trainers, helping them to perfect their craft in terms of evaluating these interviews. So Becky's going to talk a little bit about evaluation.
Thank you, Renee, and good afternoon, folks. I'm glad you have stuck around for this session. I appreciate it. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the evaluation process that we have in place for the standardized video interview. As Renee mentioned, we work very closely with the emergency medicine SVI working group throughout the standardized video interview. At the onset of the SVI, we partnered with this group to create a multi-year evaluation plan so that we could evaluate the SVI as we move forward and help to inform how we move forward year to year. Underlying this evaluation plan was the need to establish the validity of the SVI. When we talk about validity, validity refers to the extent to which evidence and theory support the inferences that we're drawing about the SVI scores based on their intended uses. And the process for providing evidence or gathering evidence of validity is really an ongoing process, and it involves gathering multiple different sources of validity. As you can see up here, we've displayed 7 different sources of validity, some of which data will become available really quickly, and others of which data will take a little more time to gather. However, to have a valid assessment or to establish the validity of assessment, you don't need to have all of these different sources. Fortunately, the work we have done so far, we have been able to gather evidence for 6 of these 7 sources of validity. The one that we still have remaining to research is that relationship between SVI scores and resident or training performance. And that's one that we haven't had an opportunity to look at yet because it takes a while for that data to become available. So if you think about the individuals who took the SVI last year, They matched earlier this year, and they'll be starting their residency programs later this summer and starting to actually perform so that we could have performance data into the fall. So that's the only reason that that one is still left on our docket as far as gathering validity evidence there. All right. Our evaluation plan includes 4 broad areas. We've been looking at psychometrics, program director and applicant reactions, fairness and preparation, as well as predicting non-academic PGY1 performance. Each of these broad areas has multiple research questions underlying them, and I'm happy to be able to share some of the results that we have for each of these here with you today. The data that we have had available to us so far covers those first 3 topic areas, the psychometrics, the PD and applicant reactions, and the fairness and preparation. We started accumulating those data back in the spring of 2017. We were able to gather additional data this past year, and we'll be continuing to collect this type of data as we move through this second operational pilot with EM. As you can see, the performance data that we have planned to collect will become available starting in really the summer into the fall of this coming year. And I'll share with you our plan for how we're going to collect that data and analyze it to establish that area of validity. First, let's take a look at the fairness piece of this evaluation. So both the AAMC and the EM-SVI working group are incredibly concerned about fairness. It is very important to us that the SVI does not result in differences in performance based on someone's race, ethnicity, or their gender. It's also important to us that the SVI not advantage individuals that have more resources than others, so we also study how applicants' preparation affects their SVI performance. What we found in our data last year, so for the 2017 or ARIS 2018 cycle, was that females did perform slightly higher than male applicants on the standardized video interview. So you can see that female applicants on average their score was 19.5, whereas male applicants on average scored 18.9. For group differences, this is considered a small effect, and even more so, this effect size is smaller than what we would see in standardized tests as well. What this data suggests, it provides some initial evidence that using the SVI in conjunction with other selection information may help to reduce group differences overall as far as who's invited to in-person interviews or who ultimately matches. And this could be particularly helpful in specialties where women are underrepresented. In addition, we looked at whether SVI scores differed by race or ethnicity, and we found that there were no practical effects here. We did not see SVI performance differing across race or ethnicity. So white applicants on average scored 19.2, black applicants 19.3, Hispanic 18.9, and Asian 19.1. Again, none of these differences reach the threshold for what's considered a small effect, which would be 0.2. Okay. Now these group differences as well are substantially smaller than what is observed for standardized tests used in selection, which usually have larger group differences for black applicants compared to white and medium differences for Hispanic applicants compared to white. So all in all, we think that this, again, is initial evidence that the SVI, if used in combination with some of these other selection data, could really help reduce group differences overall as far as who's invited and ultimately matching. Another piece that we looked at is the relationship between the SVI with other selection data, such as the STEP scores. As you can see here, the correlations between the SVI total score and the STEP exams is extremely small. All of these correlations really hover around the threshold for a small correlation, which is 0.1. Okay? What we do see Although these are small, we expected to see smaller correlations, given that these step exams, as you mentioned earlier, are measuring things that are slightly different than the SVI, or if they are capturing some of the competencies that the SVI does, they're also measuring a broader array of competencies or knowledge and skills. What we can take away from this is that the SVI may be measuring something different, and therefore may provide some unique information into the residency selection process, especially at the pre-interviewing stage. All right. Let's take a look at the program director and applicant reactions, give you a sense of how these folks felt last year after going through it. So the AAMC administered 2 applicant reaction surveys following the SVI last year. One survey was administered immediately following their SVI completion, and you'll have the opportunity to complete that survey again this year if you take the SVI. The other survey was administered a little bit later. It was conducted in the fall after applicants had received their SVI scores. So we had a higher participation rate, roughly 83%, for that survey that was conducted immediately after the interview, and a slightly lower response rate, 58%, for the survey that was administered in the fall. We have been working with our EMSVI working group to analyze the data that we've collected in these 2 different surveys and to be able to share the results. Some of you may have already seen this, but this past month we published an article in EMRA magazine. It was in the April-May issue that focused on the results that we collected around applicant preparation strategies. If any of you haven't seen that and are interested, we're highlighting a couple of results here today, but we do have a link to that article available on our SVI website as well, and I'm happy to direct you to that if you'd like. We've also been, in addition to that article, we've been working with the working group to document more detailed results of these surveys in manuscripts so that we can share more of this information with the broader community. But for today, given time limitations, I am going to highlight some of the results of what we found. Overall, applicants generally had negative reactions to the SVI and the SVI scores. That is what we would have hypothesized for a new assessment and really for most any assessment. Does anybody enjoy taking tests? Do you like it? No, not as much. I didn't enjoy it myself. So overall, they weren't satisfied. There were only 38% that said they were satisfied with the SVI overall. However, we did learn that their reactions to a certain extent depended on their SVI scores. So applicants with lower SVI scores tended to have more negative reactions than applicants who had higher SVI scores. We also learned that applicants had more positive reactions related to the procedural aspects of the SVI. So 84% felt that the SVI instructions were clear. 67% felt that the content of the SVI questions was related to the types of activities that are required of residents. And about 50% felt that they could draw on their past experiences as they were answering the questions that are included in the SVI. Again, these are just some highlighted results, but we'll be sharing more detailed results in a manuscript to come. We also asked about preparation, and we're going to go into a little more detail with these questions here so that you can have a sense as you start thinking about how you'd like to prepare for the SVI. What we saw first when we looked at the amount of time that individuals spent preparing was that students who did not prepare at all for the SVI, on average, had slightly lower scores than students who did prepare. However, among the students that did prepare for the SVI, we didn't see significant differences in average score as far as whether you prepared for 1 to 2 hours, 3 to 4 hours, 5 to 6, or some folks actually noted, albeit only 3%, over 10 hours. So the majority of individuals that did prepare for the SVI spent between 1 and 4 hours doing that. And Renee's going to share some specific preparation tips with you later in this presentation. We also looked at what strategies students were using to prepare for the SVI. And there were a number of different strategies that we asked about on the survey. Similar to the amount of time, we also found here with this question that students who did not prepare, again on average, had slightly lower SVI scores than students who did prepare with one of these strategies. However, again, the type of preparation strategy among those who did prepare didn't seem to impact, there were no significant differences in the average SVI performance across these different preparation strategies. So there doesn't seem to be a one-size-fits-all as far as preparation is concerned. The last thing I wanted to point out related to preparation, or actually taking the interview, is that we didn't see significant differences in performance based on the location that the individual chose. So we asked about a few different locations that we had heard were more common last year, so one being home, and you can see that a large percentage of the applicants did complete this SVI at home. We asked about whether they completed it in a recording space provided by their school, because we had heard that some schools were setting up that type of space, and then other locations as well. And again, we didn't see differences in SVI performance by location. In addition to applicants, we also surveyed program directors to get a sense of their reaction to this first year using SVI scores and videos. So this survey also was conducted in the fall of 2017. We invited all of the emergency medicine programs that had participated in the SVI pilot to complete this survey, and we received a 71% response rate. Of the folks that did participate, over 90% were program directors. And our questions circled around just their general reactions to the scores and the videos and their perceptions of the future of the SVI. Overall, we found that program directors were proceeding cautiously with the SVI in its first year. And that's not surprising. That is what the AAMC recommended for the first year that the assessment was being used. That's how we advised program directors in the training that we offered them prior to them having access to the SVI scores and the videos. There were approximately 54% of programs that did use the SVI scores in student selection. Of those that chose not to use the SVI scores, the reasons that they shared circled around uncertainty about how exactly to incorporate this assessment in the residency selection process, and then also others stated that they were waiting for additional information and research to become available on the SVI before they started working it into their process. For those that did use the SVI scores, about 70% reported that they didn't put a lot of weight on the SVI scores in the process, and only about 33% said that the SVI helped them compare applicants based on interpersonal and communication skills and professionalism, which is what the SVI was designed to measure. While this wasn't necessarily a favorable finding, this wasn't necessarily surprising to us either, as it's a new assessment and program directors are still becoming comfortable with the nature of the SVI score and the videos and kind of calibrating to those. Finally, we did ask how likely program directors would be to use SVI scores in a subsequent year if the SVI were to move forward, and 57% said that they would be somewhat or more likely to use it this year. In addition to the scores, we also were curious about program directors' use of the SVI videos. All right. What we found here was that most program directors reported that they watched videos to get a feel for what the video looked like, what an SVI response video was all about. They were curious. Others also reported that they watched some of the videos to try and better understand the SVI scores before they incorporated them into the process. So perhaps looking at videos at different score points along that score distribution to get a sense of what a video would look like for someone that scored higher versus in the middle of the range versus lower. Users watched a median of 111 video responses, and across all of the applicants that had completed the SVI, 71% of those applicants had 3 or more videos viewed by program directors or program director program staff. And one thing to point out is that doesn't account for, say, the duration of the video. So we know that they watched the video. We don't know how long they spent watching any of those individual videos. We did see that programs were more likely to view videos from USMDs, from applicants that had higher Step 1 scores, and also for applicants with higher SVI scores. But we did not see differences in views of applicants based on their race, ethnicity, or their gender. All right, and finally, the last evaluation area, predicting non-academic performance. I'd like to share our plan for this year. So this is that piece of evidence that I said we were waiting to become available, and it will be coming available within the next year. What we've done at the AAMC is partner with 7 different emergency medicine training programs so that we can study the relationship between SVI total scores and performance in residency. All of these EM programs are ACGME accredited. They vary in size, they vary in program setting, average Step 1 score, trainee diversity, their geography, as well as the accreditation length. We really wanted to get a sample that was representative of the broader pool of emergency medicine programs. The design of our study is it's a longitudinal correlational study. In that, we are going to follow 2 cohorts. We'll follow the folks that took the SVI last year and are starting residency training this year. And then we'll also follow the cohort that completes the SVI this year and proceeds to training next year. I'm not sure what that noise is, but I'm happy to have figured out now that it's not me that's causing it.
Okay. And it's not gunfire. So
Okay.
I think
I kept thinking I was stepping or touching something and causing a distraction.
it sounds like somebody's stapling something maybe up to that wall.
All right, so we'll be following last year as well as this year's cohorts in those respective programs to see how SVI scores correlate with performance. There are 2 groups of data that we're interested in looking at in this study. So one would be looking at locally held selection data. So this data, some examples might be file review scores, whether someone was invited or not invited for an in-person interview. If the program has in-person interview scores, we might look at those. We also might consider looking at rank order list. What we ultimately choose to look at within local selection data will really depend on conversations and discussions that we have with the residency programs, getting a sense of what data they have available, and also which of these data are most appropriate given the nature of our study. What will help us answer the question? The second group of data pertains to intern performance. Okay, this is our performance data. Some examples that we're using as starting points for the conversation with these partnering programs are ACGME milestone ratings or end of shift ratings. But we have started talking with these programs, and there are several other outcomes that we plan to consider, and that will be an evolving discussion over the course of the summer that we'll be finalizing in the fall so that we can collect our first round of performance data in the winter. A more detailed timeline for this study is shared here. So currently we're working to set up the infrastructure for the study. For those of you that are doing research, some of these things will not not look unfamiliar to you at all. So we finalized our research design, and we have IRB approval to move forward with this study. We're now working with each of the programs who are participating to obtain IRB approval at their respective institutions and set up data use agreements to ensure students' privacy and confidentiality of the data that's a part of this study. In the late summer and early fall, as trainees come in for orientation, in that time frame, we'll be recruiting them and asking them if they consent to participate. We'll also be identifying that locally held selection data and outcomes we'd like to include in the study and establishing a secure exchange process for that data. As we move further into the fall and winter and into the spring, we'll do a couple of different rounds of exchanging that data, analyzing it, and then sharing results with the community. So we're looking forward to having more information for everyone very soon. A few last research projects that I wanted to mention. So there are 2 research projects that are currently in progress. For the first, we have partnered with CORD to look at the relationship between SVI and eSLO ratings, given the similar constructs that are measured in these 2 different assessments. We're also partnering with MVME so that we can look at the relationship between SVI scores and Step 2 clinical skills subscores. So as I mentioned before, we were able to look at the relationship between SVI scores and Step 2 pass-fail, but now we're going to look at the actual scores themselves and see what the relationship is there. And finally, we've started preliminary conversations but have not started any work yet to look at how SVI scores may relate to ACGME milestones. And that would be a partnership that we hope to have with ACGME. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Renee to move away from the research and back into the more practical application of the SVI.
Thanks, Becky. And I think this will be of great interest to you all as you all are planning to take the SVI. This is a timeline for the upcoming cycle. As you can see, the SVI will open at the same time that ARIS does, and we've gotten a date, a solidified date, that ARIS will open on June 7th. So when ARIS opens, the SVI will be available. So applicants will have access to go in, indicate that they're applying in emergency medicine, and then they will get information and email so that they can go into the system to register. The SVI will be available from June 7th until 11:59 p.m. on July 15th. So you have roughly about 6 weeks to complete the SVI. So we recommend that you not wait until July 15th to take the SVI. You know, kind of think about what your schedule is going to be during those 6 weeks and try to find the most convenient time for you to complete it. For applicants there are some exceptions for applicants to get an extension. I would commend you to the essentials document that we have on our website that explains under what circumstances applicants can request an extension to complete the SVI. But for most people, it will be July 15th. For those applicants who complete the SVI by July 15th at 11:59 p.m., the scores will be available. We hope to have the scores available by September 1st. That will hopefully give applicants some time to digest the information, consider how many programs they'd like to apply to, talk it over with their advisors, and move from there. ARIS will open to program directors on September 15th, so that's when they'll be getting the scores. So when they open up ARIS for the upcoming season, the scores will be available in the system for them as well. For applicants who were approved for an extension, they will have time to complete the interview by the 15th of September, and those scores will be available beginning October 15th. So what's new? Everything's new for you all if you've not taken it before. but we kind of use this to kind of separate last year from this year. Again, the time period for completing the applications has changed a little bit. Last year was until July 31st, and we cut those 2 weeks off to give us more time to make sure that we do all the quality assurance, make sure that everything is tested before we make the scores available. We've also revised our website to provide better information. Based on the feedback we received from applicants last year, we bolstered the information that's available on the website for applicants, so we commend that to you to kind of check it out. Like I said, it has the information about extensions. For folks who may need an accommodation, the information is there, so that's definitely available for you as well. We worked with an applicant who went through the process last year to update the tips for applicants, using his experience going through the SVI last year, and he gave some really great feedback to us that we included in the document that we hope will be very helpful to you all as you all are preparing for the SVI this year. We are making available online practice interviews, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And again, last year I think we released the scores about 2 days before they were made available to the programs. I think it was September 13th last year that we released the scores to applicants. So we're going to be working very hard to get those scores out to applicants 2 weeks earlier, by September 1st this year. For medical schools, we received quite a bit of commentary from the medical schools saying that it would be helpful to them in working with students to have the scores available. And so this year we're making arrangements, we're working through the system to make the scores available to medical schools of the applicants. However, it's important, and this is critical, that the applicants have to give permission. So we don't just automatically give the scores to your medical school. When you go in to complete the registration and complete the terms and conditions for interviewees, there will be a specific question that you will answer that will give us permission to give those scores to your medical school.
And Renee, if I could just jump in, I told them this morning, for you to get good advising in emergency medicine, your advisor needs to know everything about you. And I've learned this the hard way when I was advising a student once and I didn't know the results of, that they took a leave of absence or they failed this or that. It's impossible to accurately advise a student. So if you're wondering how I knew the scores of the 20 students we had, I emailed them and said, hey, would you be willing to share your score with me? Because I really think it's important. If you got a 6, I got to know that because I'm going to want to know why you aren't getting interview offers. And so I would implore you, you don't have to share it with everybody, but it really helps us as advisors to know, what I do. This is just a behind the scenes really briefly. If I have a student who I think is a fairly strong applicant or even an average applicant and they're not getting interview offers, the first thing I do is dig into their application. I pull up their SLOs. I try to look to see, could they have gotten a bad letter? What's the deal here? What's happening? So, again, that's just a behind the scenes, but I think the issue of sharing your scores with your schools, I think it's to your benefit from the standpoint that if you don't do well on it, you shouldn't try to hide that from them. They need that information because it's going to help them help you to maybe apply to more programs or change the programs you apply to and some of those things. So just 2 cents on that.
Yes. And we'll also have the medical schools sign terms and conditions too, that they're going to be using the scores that we provide them, that you give permission to, for the purpose of advising you. So it won't be used for anything other than that. So there's the due diligence on both sides to make sure that you're not compromised in any way. The program directors, we're going to be training them again this year. As Rebecca said earlier, they did go through training last year. They went through the process of getting the scores and trying to figure out how to incorporate those scores into their selection process. This year, we're trying to take it a step further in terms of not only just training the program director, but also asking that everyone on the program's selection committee be trained so that they understand also what the score is about, what they should be getting out of the scores, what the meaning of the scores are. So we're going to start training, make training available to programs in July. We're updating the ARIS system to give them the capabilities, as with all the scores in the ARIS system, to be able to filter and export them. And we're providing them with a user guide that they can have on their desktop so that they can refer to any information about the SVI and have that right at their fingertips. So things to know. As Nick said earlier, it is a requirement for all applicants applying to emergency medicine. There's a question when you when you register for ARIS and you go to the dashboard, at the bottom of that screen, there is a question that asks applicants if they're applying in emergency medicine or if they're considering applying to emergency medicine. When you click yes, then that information is sent to our system, and then you will receive an email with instructions on how to access the SVI. So it's critically important for you to answer that question yes so that you can get the information. Another thing that I would recommend is that you check your email address. At the AAMC, if you've had any change in email address over the time that you've been in medical school, when you go into ARIS, that information, the most recent one, we hope, is being pulled into the ARIS system. But we want you to verify that that email address is correct, because that's where you'll be getting your registration information. So log into ARIS, click yes. Well, no, before you click yes, go to the personal information screen, check your email, then click yes, and then you'll get the requisite email. Continuing policies, we had the interviewee agreement last year. We will have that again this year, but we'll be adding that question asking if you will give us permission to send your scores to the medical school. Completion of the SVI is not a required field in ARIS, so there's nothing in the ARIS system that will mandate you to complete this. And the programs won't see that. Well, the programs will see that you didn't complete it if you didn't complete it, because there won't be a score there. But there's no way for them to do a filter to say, you know, was this person, did they check the question yes, and why isn't their score there? So it's up to you, but programs will know if you didn't complete it because you won't have a score there. Requests for retakes will not be considered, so you get a one and done. So make sure that you're prepared, make sure you give yourself sufficient time, make sure you have enough wiggle room. If someone gets sick or something, you have a day or two before the deadline to make sure that you complete it on time. But once you've taken it, the score will be provided based on the responses that you provide. And so there won't be an opportunity to retake it unless there's a technical issue. And there's a process, a full process in place for investigating any technical issues. We also won't be rescoring your interview. Once our raters have completed the scoring, that's the final score. So there's not an opportunity to go back and look at it. And we won't do any voiding of the scores. Once the score is completed, it will be made available to programs. New policies, again, the school contact, you have to consent. But as Nick said, it's a great idea to do that so that they can provide you the best possible advising that they can. The scores will be canceled if any personal information is provided about patients or colleagues. We didn't say this last year, and it happened. A couple of students provided some information, some personal information. And so in a case like that, we will just cancel your score, and that score won't be made available to programs. So HIPAA is in play. Make sure you protect the information that you provide. And when you're responding to questions, don't provide any personal information. With regard to preparing, one of the things that we often tell applicants is that the best way to prepare is to really think in advance about examples, tangible examples around the two competencies, interpersonal and communication skills and professionalism. Think about what you've done throughout your medical career or even before. You don't necessarily have to use a medical example to answer the question. If you've had an experience that addresses the question and it wasn't in a medical arena, that's a good question as long as you can speak with passion about it, you're very clear about what was accomplished and so forth. So it's a good idea to start thinking about those things now so that you can start framing them so that when the questions come up, you'll know how to address them. Discuss those experiences with your advisor, and consider in the Essentials Guide, there is the scoring rubric. Talk to your advisor and see where they would rate that response on the rubric, and perhaps talk that through and see if there's ways that you can improve upon that or elaborate it, or maybe perhaps use another example. All those things should be done in advance of taking the SVI. In terms of practicing, you can practice with peers. A lot of people did mock interviews last year, some with their schools, some with their friends. There are many techniques that you can use in terms of preparing to make sure you have a complete response. Answer the question fully. The raters who will be evaluating your responses are looking for a complete response, and they've been trained to look for that. So in terms of this STAR approach, look for indicate the situation, indicate the task that you completed, the action, and the result. That's a complete response. Those are very important, and that will get you the maximum number of points. Be prepared for behavioral questions as well as situational questions. When you're doing your practicing and rehearsing, make sure that you're doing a good selection of both so that you'll be able to respond. Practice in the higher review system. It's going to be available to you in two ways. You can complete a practice form. Last year we didn't have these available. We received feedback from applicants saying that it would be really helpful if they could just run through the interview before taking the real interview. So we worked together, retired some of the questions that were used last year, and those were put into practice forms. So we have 2 practice forms that are available for applicants to complete this year, to give you a chance to run through it. Looking at the entire environment. And so I think that would be helpful for you as well. Practice on a device that you're going to be using to make sure that you're familiar with it, it's comfortable for you, and if you need to do any troubleshooting to make sure it's set up appropriately, it's good to do that during the practice. We won't be able to give you feedback on the responses, but just going through the process is going to help you to feel better about it, feel more comfortable as you're preparing for it. With regard to the setup, with the technology, I talked about the computer already. Make sure that you do some testing to make sure it's set up so you're not just getting, your eyes and that's it. It's important to shut down any other applications so you don't get jarred when a notification comes in unexpected when you're trying to answer a question and you get an alert. Make sure that you shut all that stuff down. In the higher review system, before you complete the real interview, it goes through a technology check. As long as you get all greens, you're set to move forward and complete the interview. If you get any of the areas that are not green, you need to troubleshoot that to make sure that everything is positioned properly so you can do your very best with it. With regard to the environment, find a place that's private, well lit, so that it comes across fine. Avoid bright lights, all the things that they normally tell you. Consider the backdrop, as Nick was saying, move all the stuff that's going to be a distraction. Our raters are not going to be looking at that kind of stuff. Their job is to listen to what you're saying and to evaluate your responses based on what you say, the content of your responses. But as you know, these videos are going to program directors. And as Becky said earlier, program directors are going to be going in and looking at some of the videos. So you want to make sure that you're preparing for this just as you would be preparing if you're going in for an in-person interview. So with regard to logistics, as was stated earlier, you want to be dressed appropriately. You want to make sure you get enough rest so you don't feel tired. Give yourself plenty of time to complete the interview. There's only a limited number of reasons why we'll be granting extensions, and poor planning is not one of them. So if you wait until the last day and your car broke down, that happened last year, or someone was called in to clinic at the last minute, that happened last year, those are not sufficient reasons to get granted an extension. So give yourself some wiggle room for life to happen and be prepared so that you can do your best. Now, with regard to the free resources that we have, they're all on our website. As I stated earlier, we revamped the website. It's much easier for you to get to information. The preparation guide that we got a lot of good information from one of the students who completed the SVI last year is available. We have sample questions on our website, and we have the practice interviews that are available for you. We recommend that, and the practice interviews are available now on our website, so you don't have to wait until ARIS opens to go in and start practicing. You can do that now just to kind of get a sense of where you are and to see if there's anything that you need to do. And once you get into the higher view system, once you register in ARIS and you're able to get that registration link to get into the higher view system to complete your interview, the higher view system has interview questions that you can also use to practice. They're not medically associated questions. They're just basic interview questions, but they will provide you with an opportunity to respond to the questions in the environment in which you will be completing the SVI. So we commend that to you as well. These are the resources that are available. The Essentials Guide, that is your Bible, so to speak, of the SVI. It tells you everything that you need to know about the SVI. We recommend that you read that through at least once before you go through the process of completing it, so you know what the rules and regulations are and what you need to do to prepare. So with that, we'll take questions.
So I'll repeat that. I know that the SVI's purpose is to assess interpersonal skills and professionalism. Aside from getting the scores earlier, what is the difference between this examination and the Step 2 CS examination that also assesses our interpersonal and professionalism skills via the CIS score?
All right, let's see if it's on. All right, very good. So there is a slight difference. So the Step 2 CS, which is the STEP exam that's most closely related to the SVI, certainly covers a broader range of competencies and skills than does the SVI. If you look at the 3 different components, not all of those are directly compared. I believe the CIS component is most closely related to the SVI, but it's a different methodology than the SVI, and probably captures some different information than what the SVI does. So there is a little bit of a difference there. Do you have anything else to add?
Other than the fact that we're going to be doing testing with the NDME to really flesh out what the correlation is between the SVI and the CS, the Step 2C. So we'll know more about that as we continue to do the research. But at this point, it's just, we believe that based on the correlations that we've seen so far, that it's not apples to apples. It really is measuring different things.
I think also in terms of what the program directors are receiving from the SVI versus the Step 2. So with the SVI, you're able to draw on your past experiences and the learning and development that you've had over medical school in order to answer those questions, as opposed to the standardized assessment that's used for the STEP. So there's a little bit of different information that's collected to evaluate those competencies in each of those different pieces.
Other questions? I had one. Are the students able to see when program directors have viewed their video?
No, that's not available.
Because you had mentioned a statistic of how many videos were watched. So you're able to see that, but the students can't?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on the back end of ARIS, so we were able to go into the back end of ARIS to see how programs were interacting in the PDWS, and of course applicants don't have access to the PDWS. So.
And then I had heard anecdotally from a couple of my students that they were actually asked about the SVI on the interview trail. Have you heard anything about that, where students asked, hey, I saw your SVI and it was really good, or are you able to get any data from that?
We did did not ask explicitly in the program director survey if programs had asked about the SVI in general when applicants were coming in for interview. It was administered in November, so not all of their interviews may have been completed at that point.
Sure.
The one thing we did ask was whether or not program directors followed up with students who had not completed the interview and therefore had a missing score to find out why there was a missing score there. And the majority said that no, they didn't follow up to inquire about that.
Okay. I think you'll get some, I'm glad you're following up post-match. I mean, anecdotally, it seems that after the match, when students realize that the process is complete and they're happy that it's over, they may reflect on pieces of the match and the application process they didn't previously feel like were of value. So I wonder if you find that out as you continue to survey students.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
I know. Okay. I know you guys mentioned this before, like that you'll get an email as soon as you check the box that you're going to do an EM residency. I just want to make sure, is that like an email? It's just, does it like go to junk mail or something like that? Is it like an important email that like kind of shows up there? Because I'm like texting friends about this at my local school, and I didn't even know really about this till you just gave this presentation, honestly. And a lot of my friends are like, what? We have to do this? And I just wanted to make sure. I feel like there should be like some kind of notification, maybe an email from AAMC generally to the general population about, hey, this is a requirement for emergency medicine students that want to go into emergency medicine.
Well, one of the ways we've been trying to approach that is to work through the medical schools, because we won't know who's applying in emergency medicine until they go into the ERA system. So we've been working very closely with the group on student affairs to say, please get this information out to all your applicants. And we're telling them, if you're considering applying in emergency medicine, or if you know you're applying in emergency medicine, this is required. We've also been working with the OSR, the Organization of Student Representatives, and they've consented to work with us to get the information out as well, because they can also send information out to all of you saying, here's what's going on, you know, at the AAMC with regard to the SVI. But we're happy to, if you all think of any other ways that we can get information out. We're working with EMRA and AAEM, RSA, all the alphabet soup of the student organizations, and also asking them to get information out, because of course there are students who are interested in applying in emergency medicine that are part of those groups, and if we can get information out about the SVI through them, we'll do that as well.
One of the other concerns I have, and I'm sorry to cut you off, you're about to say something, is like people that may not go into ERIS immediately on whatever day it opens in June, I think June 6th or something like that, and they kind of start doing their ERIS application in, you know, early July or something like that. Like, what would you do for those people?
Well, again, we feel like there's been enough information that's been disseminated, and we've been talking about this since really February. We've been sending out information to the medical schools when we first, when our leadership told us that we could go to a second-year pilot. We announced it, provided the information to the medical schools, and every opportunity to speak to student organizations, we've been trying to get the information out. We recognize that certain applicants may make a late decision, but again, it has to be based on if they take a, you know, oh, I decided, I woke up this morning and I want to go into emergency medicine and I've not done a clerkship and they've not done it before. That could qualify as one of the exceptions for taking it later. But other than that, just not knowing, I think we've done a pretty good job of getting the information out there.
Again, it speaks to the point of having a really good advisor. I mean, I'm concerned about your medical school that you don't know about this. I mean, I'm really glad you're here, and your classmates should have came. But no, it's... Yeah.
And it's due by, you know, it starts when ERIS starts and ends on
And you said something else really important. Email for the next 6 months for you guys is absolutely essential. So we talked a little bit about Interview Broker, but here's what my medical students do. Some of them set up a separate email through ERAS for the match process. They send those emails to their phone. So when they get an interview offer, their phone dings. And if they're on rounds, they pull it out and say, I have to respond to this. And you know, you really want to be tethered. These are essential emails that you need to respond to. So, and you don't have to do that. And you guys are way more creative than when I heard that, I was like, I would never know how to do that. But, you know, for the next little bit, your email and being available is very important. So, you know, make sure you're attentive to that. Always have a small subset of medical students that I feel like I have to send like a message in a bottle or like smoke signals or something they never reply to email. And that is not going to be your friend during this match process. It's very important that you're available.
One thing I was just going to circle back on, because you mentioned, will the email be marked important or will it go into my spam folder? We did have, it is possible that the email could go to your spam filter. Everybody's email inbox treats the email differently. So if you go into ARIS and you click yes and you don't see an email pop up in 24 hours, and we've advised this also in our essentials, check your spam folder. And if you still don't see it there, go back into ARIS and just verify that the email that's in there is the email that you're checking. And if it's not, all you need to do is update that email and save it in ARIS, and then you'll be sent another invitation to that preferred email address. Of course, you're also welcome to contact us if both of those things fail. Please notify us immediately.
And also, I was tweeting out, for those of you, and a couple of you are on Twitter. I know Twitter's for adults. You're all on Snapchats and everything else. But I tweeted out the essentials document. I tweeted out a little picture of the scoring rubric. So if you guys are following the hashtag SAEM18, if you go through that, you'll see those tweets. But I agree, the website looks really good, I think, and the essentials document is longer and more conclusive. So other questions? We're getting near time here, but yeah.
And this will go to the scoring report that you've posted on Twitter, you said, but this was touched on briefly, I think, in the presentation, but what are some things that differentiate like a score of 27 to a score of 19 to a score of 6? Some of the best things that medical students do to score well on this, in other words.
So I'll just go back to some of what we found in the survey about how applicants reported spending time and also the preparation strategies. It's hard to pinpoint just one thing, honestly. I think given that we didn't find significant differences depending on the preparation strategy or significant differences depending on the amount of time spent, just that you were going to score slightly higher if you did spend time or you did employ a preparation strategy. You have to think about what's best for you as far as how much time you need to spend or what style of preparation works best. You know, we've tried to provide a number of different free resources so that you guys can choose the one that's gonna work for you. The online practice forums, I'm glad you asked this because I wanted to circle back to this anyhow. As Renee mentioned, the online practice forms, each of those two forms include retired questions from the SVI. So those questions were developed by the folks at AAMC and the subject matter experts who have developed those questions. So certainly take advantage of those online practice interview forms. You can go in and complete those forms as many times as you want at no cost. So if you want to go through the first time just to get a sense of the look and feel of the interview platform, that's fine. Then you can go in, register again, and complete it as an actual practice interview. The other thing that's available through those practice interviews and will also be available when you receive your invitation for the actual SVI, you'll be given the opportunity to take some of those typical job interview questions that have nothing to do with medical residency, but just give you an opportunity to get used to responding to a computer or to your phone. So I would take advantage of those things. The other thing that Renee mentioned that I would come back to, and Nick also mentioned this a bit in the speaking technique, but we really are focused on the content that you share related to each of those two different competencies. So really thinking about the experience that you've had or the training that you've been provided related to each of those different competencies in preparation for completing the interview. And not just thinking about those things, but also thinking about organizing your response. As Renee mentioned, there is a STAR model. If anybody Googles structured interviews, oftentimes that comes up, where you describe kind of the situation or context, what you did, and then how it turned out. And that won't, just using that model won't guarantee you a high score, but using that model in combination with a strong example of your interpersonal skills or your professionalism puts you in a better opportunity to achieve well on the SVI. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, there's one more. We'll take one more, and then they have to move along to another meeting, so we'll take one more, and then we'll wrap up. Is that okay?
Yes. Yeah.
What's the intra-rater consistency? I might have missed it. I had to use the bathroom a couple minutes ago. So what is it? So if Charlie is a grader and I'm a grader, how do you guys measure that, and what type of quality assurance measures have you taken to make sure that you have consistency between raters?
Sure,
or graders?
that's a great question. So I can speak to last year, since this year hasn't happened yet. So last year we calculated an interclass correlation coefficient for our raters, and we found that to be 0.78, which is rather strong inter-rater agreement among raters for this type of rating process. So we do. In addition to calculating that, as Renee mentioned, they do go through extensive training where we work with them not only to train them on the standardized process and how to use the rubric to apply it to responses and score, but we also go through a lot of practice opportunities with the raters where they'll watch sample videos, they'll rate independently, we'll discuss as a group. During the training, part of the discussion is sharing with them how program directors rated the sample response and why the program director rated it that way. So we do a lot of that to make sure and improve upon that consistency so that the raters ultimately we want them to be interchangeable. We don't want it to matter which interviewer or which rater rated your response versus someone else's response. The other thing that we do to minimize any biases, in addition to just the unconscious bias training that's provided, we have one rater per question in the 6 questions of your interview. So there will be 6 different raters contributing to the scoring of your interview.
All right. Well, why don't we give them a round of applause? Hopefully that was really helpful.